Stay tuned following this program for a preview of another IMW&A diversity production.
My name is Ron Lofton. Today, people with disabilities, like other groups, are interested in learning about their history. But if you were to check out your local library, chances are your experience would be much the same as mine.
You'll find a lot of history on these shelves, but not a whole lot on disabilities. Much of that history has been hidden away or destroyed, much like the people who have had disabilities.
Starting in prehistoric times, when those with disabilities were seen as just extra mouths to feed, unworthy of survival. Even in early civilizations such as Greece, newborns with disabilities were routinely killed or abandoned.
Let there be a law that no deformed child shall live.
It was not until ancient Rome became Christian that this practice was stopped, even though Christian Rome had many slaves and beggars with disabilities. In the Middle Ages, many thought disabilities were caused by the devil, who according to biblical accounts could only be cast out by miracles and faith. Medieval doctrines blamed the evil within the person themselves or the sins of their parents. Generally, the Islamic world was more enlightened and compassionate. In Egypt, some of the first humane mental hospitals were established. By contrast, when disease swept Europe, people with mental disabilities were among the first to be blamed, often killed as witches. Even when not openly persecuted, people with disabilities led a second-class existence, often kept in monasteries or poorhouses for most of their lives. People with mental illness were thrown into filthy human warehouses called asylums, supported in part by Sunday tourists who would pay to watch the people locked inside. And then came the age of reason and science, of human respect and reform, the 1700s and 1800s, when for the first time schools were established for people who were blind, deaf, or who had developmental disabilities. Braille was invented, as were sign languages for the hearing impaired. Larger and more humane institutions were built and put under the control of doctors in the hopes of curing disability.
But soon science got carried away, diagnosing, labeling, developing medical models.
In an ever-growing system of depersonalized institutions, which eventually fell under the influence of eugenics, a dangerous offshoot of Darwinism, which held that science could improve the genetic qualities of a race by controlling who should and shouldn't have children. Institutions once again became warehouses for people now considered genetic mistakes. By the early 1900s, sterilization laws for people with disabilities have been passed in 30 U.S. states. Adolf Hitler, a strong believer in eugenics, came to power in Germany in the 1930s with a vision of a super race. Amid a blitz of propaganda, Hitler sterilized almost anyone with a hereditary disability. When war came, Hitler took the next step, secretly ordering the killing of 200,000 people in German institutions. The gas chambers used to exterminate Jews were actually first used on people with disabilities. Ironically, the American forces that helped defeat Hitler were led by the first U.S. president with a significant disability, Franklin Roosevelt. Disabilities, however, had such a stigma. He hid the polio that paralyzed his legs, never appearing with his wheelchair, always photographed seated or propped up. But many returning veterans could not hide their disabilities. When they came home, they found themselves no longer able to access much of what America had to offer, including many jobs. By the 1950s and 60s, new charity groups emerged, well-meaning but often demeaning. They introduced on their fundraising TV telethons a new negative stereotype, the pathetic disabled child, totally dependent on charity, totally helpless in the outside world, someone who needed to be cured.
He will be a patient with many other young unfortunates. Pathetically, yet eagerly, the young handicapped boys and girls enter their new and shiny home.
True, the poster kids raised millions, but at what cost? Our society had been trained to view people with disabilities with pity.
My kids cannot go in the workplace. There's nothing they can do.
How could we ever see these same people as competent?
People with disabilities themselves would have to speak up, and now they were about to make their voices heard. It was the 1960s, and like the reform era of the 1800s, social change was in the air. African Americans were marching for their freedom.
Women, too, sought equal rights under the law, and much of the country clamored for peace.
But while African Americans struggled to get out of the back of the bus, Americans with disabilities were just trying to get on the bus.
Isolation and segregation were commonplace in housing, education, employment, and communications, too. Medical advancement meant people with disabilities were living longer, but their quality of life had not improved. What was needed was a redefinition of disability, not as a medical or economic issue, but as a civil rights issue. Putting that belief into action was a Berkeley graduate student named Ed Roberts. Paralyzed from the neck down by polio, Roberts founded the Physically Disabled Students Program, helping students with disabilities get assistive technology and services, as well as find accessible apartments and transportation.
I learned a lot from the women's movement at Berkeley in the early days, including that disability is powerful. And the independent living movement is all about taking control of your own life.
Soon expanding to include non-students too, the program became the Center for Independent Living,
the first of what would become more than 300 such centers nationwide. Today, these centers are at the heart of the independent living movement. Roberts went on to also found the World Institute on Disability, dedicated to self-advocacy, education, integration, and equal rights for people with disabilities. Unified groups of people with disabilities and family members at the state and national level were coming together to push for change at the legislative level as well. For instance, Public Law 94-142 guaranteed all children with disabilities the right to a public education, but problems still remained. States were beginning to close their huge institutions in favor of community day programs and alternative residential options. But when funding wasn't in place, many people were left with nowhere to go, thereby swelling the ranks of the homeless, a problem we still have today. As the growing disability movement was quick to point out, conditions for people with disabilities were still far worse than for any other group. Too many kids were sitting in separate schools and classrooms, away from their peers. Too many adults were still shut out of the private sector workforce and were either unemployed or working in segregated work centers for menial wages. By the late 80s, disability advocates within the government like Justin Dart and Evan Kemp were saying the country could continue supporting people with government entitlements, or they could give people with disabilities the chance to support themselves.
They persuaded Congress that an all-inclusive civil rights law drafted by the leaders of the disabilities movement would make sense both socially and economically.
Nothing could be more in harmony with family values and the American heritage than empowering all Americans to participate in free enterprise democracy.
After months of hearings and protests, the Americans with Disabilities Act became law, making the United States the first country to outlaw discrimination against people with disabilities. Now, access to public buildings, transportation, telecommunications, and most importantly, jobs is the law of the land.
Today, America welcomes into the mainstream of life all of our fellow citizens with disabilities. We embrace you for your abilities. I now lift my pen to sign this Americans with Disability Act and say, let the shameful wall of exclusion finally come tumbling down.
But the struggle isn't over. Grassroots organizations have sprung up across the country to protect people's hard-won rights. Groups formed and operated by people with disabilities themselves. Some groups have opted for civil disobedience to make themselves heard, just like civil rights supporters did in the 1960s. ADAPT, based in Denver, began by fighting to make the local buses accessible. Today, they fight for personal attendant services. Instead of paying billions in Medicaid dollars to keep young people with disabilities in nursing homes, the government could spend much less by allowing Medicaid to be used to purchase personal assistant services, thus allowing people to live independently in homes of their own. It's much easier to access a job from your home than it is from a nursing home.
The rights movement is a work in progress,
part of an emerging disability culture based on self-determination and pride. Pride means I'm okay, just the way I am. Self-determination means I want the same access and occupational opportunities as you have.
People with disabilities don't believe that's asking too much.
America's task now is not to go back. Our task is to go forward, to focus the full force of science and free enterprise on creating a culture that will empower all people to live their new potential.
This is where I work, here at the Office of Disability Services at a state community college. Today, assistive technology is enabling people with disabilities to do more and more in the classroom and in the workplace. But what technology can't do is change people's attitudes towards a disability. That's going to take a while, considering the negative stereotypes that we've seen in TV shows, movies, commercials, and other media. Stereotypes that have either played on our fear.
Randy! Where's the rest of me?
Or been used for comic effect.
Open the door for Mr. Muckle! What? Open the door for Mr. Muckle, the blind man! Wait! Wait a minute! You got that door closed again, huh?
Both by Hollywood
I'm awfully sorry.
and Madison Avenue.
If you're paying $100 or more for a dress shirt, may we suggest a jacket to go with it?
Hollywood loves killers and has all too often linked them with disabilities.
Does the sight in the eyes sicken you, boy?
From the mentally ill, psychotic killer,
Here's Johnny!
to the disfigured villain.
I am not a human being! I am an animal! Cold-blooded! Crank the AC!
Although Hollywood often uses disabilities in films, it only rarely uses real people with disabilities. And when it does, their roles are usually either terrifying or condescending. Thankfully, disability awareness did not go completely unnoticed by Hollywood.
All I've wanted is for people to treat me like anybody else instead of pitying me.
At first, there were only a handful of portrayals. By the 70s and 80s, we increasingly began to see disability issues being accurately addressed on screen.
Don't worry, Mr. Sims. I look weird, but otherwise I'm real normal. Everything will be cool. Thanks a lot.
Sometimes, even by actors with disabilities. If anything, now we're seeing a stereotype at the other end of the spectrum. The melodramatic superhero, the super crip.
Still, despite cases of overcompensation, progress has been considerable, especially on TV.
It's come a long way from the pitiful, degrading charity approach using kids on telethons. Today, the medium has a growing record of disability-related specials.
I'm learning to write my name.
You gotta be a regular good man, huh?
Regular good man.
Weekly shows are featuring characters with disabilities as well. Business, through its TV advertising, has also begun to portray people with disabilities. The biggest TV breakthrough has been the show Life Goes On, a family drama featuring Chris Burke, the first actor with Down syndrome to star in a network series.
To tell you the truth, I'm not an actor with a disability, but I'm an actor who has the ability to just go out there and try to show other people how they can do it.
15 or 20 years ago, you would have never seen Chris on TV, and you would have never seen me here either.
But with today's technology, people with disabilities can do jobs that employers would have thought impossible just a few short years ago. For instance, my job, making sure college students get the assistive technology and services that they need so they can learn the job skills businesses are looking for today. And technology doesn't end in the classroom. It's allowed people to use transportation, to navigate walkways, to enter public and private buildings, including workplaces. Technology's not only given people with disabilities access to employment, it's given employers access to the skills and talents of people with disabilities. Skills that for so long have been wasted because of society's attitudes toward disability.
We want to work together closely. We want to help you open up. We want you to understand that people with disabilities make business sense.
Many of the physical obstacles to employment have fallen, but
now it's time to bring down the final barriers, the attitudinal barriers,
so that people with disabilities can join in the diversity that is the American workforce today.
Hi, Jay. Hey, what's up? Well, I did the recycling.
I'm Tim Harrington, living proof that America's workplace is changing. More and more, America's 49 million citizens with disabilities are getting an opportunity to show their abilities in regular mainstream jobs.
I'm glad to meet you.
Hi, Tim Harrington.
We love you. Stand back, everyone. Is everything okay? What will you be talking about in there?
Actually, about how to communicate with people with disabilities.
Did you think of that all by yourself? Oh, that's so wonderful.
You really need to see this video. Really. All we're asking for is a little common courtesy. That's why we're calling this Simple Respect. 10 easy steps, right?
Oh, hey, Mr. Harrington, about the title. The producers decided we needed something a little more dramatic, so they came up with something new.
Oh, really? Like what? The 10 Commandments? Do you think I'm Charlton Heston?
No, you're still Tim Harrington.
You're sure?
Yes.
All right. You know, if anyone out there feels a little uncomfortable with me as host, it's okay. In fact, it's natural to feel a little uncomfortable with people in situations you're not familiar with. You'll see the kinds of situations these people face every day and get some tips. Okay, commandments on how we can all help.
Commandment number 5. Treat adults as adults.
I pay bills. I work for a living. And last but certainly not least, I pay my share of my taxes. Let's try a little experiment. Try to treat me more like a man, not like a little kid.
There you are. You know, some of my best friends have friends just like you.
Oh, really? So do mine.
Now, I insist on walking you to the bus.
No, thanks. I drove.
By yourself?
How quickly can we get this woman a copy of the video?
Soon, Mr. Harrington. Real soon.